I first got interested in that from an old cassette recording that my aunt had made of my great-grandfather. He lived to be the ripe old age of 97, but he still died when I was about 2 years old. But we had these cassettes of his voice speaking, telling stories and singing that were around. I could listen to them. And so it was this voice of my family that I felt connected to, this voice of the past. And I loved listening to them. When I got older, I converted those recordings to CD, and then I performed with my band with his voice. And it was a project I called Duets with Ghosts. I love the idea of voices telling stories and music, so it's something that I've had interest in for many years. Yeah. So that was one project, and it started with family recordings. My wife recorded her grandmother, who was 90 years old, and it was about her experience growing up in the Philippines, which was fascinating to me. And I made music to that. And the idea of the family grew into telling the stories of a community. And the first project I did was in New York City in a neighborhood called Flushing, Queens, which is extremely diverse. There's many, many, many languages spoken there, and I interviewed people from many different countries. And the idea was that I would capture some of their story, and I'd write music inspired by their stories. And then when people would come to the concert, they would actually hear parts of these people's stories. So when I sat down with them, I recorded the interviews. And then when we did the performance, I used little parts of those interviews interwoven with the music. So an audience member would hear a friend, hear a family member talking about their experience, and then we would hear music deepening that experience. And it created this wonderful portrait of a community as being this wonderfully diverse place. Many times these people would walk down the street and they walk by the Chinese restaurant, they walk by the Korean food vendor, but not speak to them. And here in this project, they were able to hear about this person's history. They were able to hear about their hopes and dreams, their desires for their children, how they wanted them to succeed, how hard they worked. And those themes are all relatable to everyone in the audience, yet we were hearing them from people who had come from all over the world to this one neighborhood. I love the project. And this project grew to going to other communities around the country. And so I've gone to many places and spoken with many people about all sorts of different things. I've been in Harrisonburg the past couple days and talking with all sorts of people. One of the places I was today was Harrisonburg High School, speaking with amazing students there. And you'll definitely hear their voices in the concert. And I was just so moved by these young people and their courage and the hard work that they're doing. And each one has a very fascinating story. And Harrisonburg High School, it reminds me of being in New York City in a way. There's people from all over the world there. I was really quite surprised to just stand in the hallway and see all the different types of people there. And when I heard their stories, I was captivated. So I've recorded all these stories. I've got hours and hours and hours. I return back home and I just listen to them over and over again. And I start kind of taking bits and pieces of them. And within each interview, there's a certain, I call it the golden moment. There's a moment when we hit on something that I can relate to, I think people can relate to, something, there's an emotional quality of it that I feel is a piece of music. There's a piece of music in there. So I take those, because we may have talked for a half hour, but I might just use a couple minutes of their voice when they're getting to this kind of juicy moment. But, you know, I take that moment and then I just listen to it over and over again, and just, this is the fun part for me, because as a musician, I just love to see what happens and start hearing music in my head, and I do, and that's the magic for me.